I'm Carrie, and this is Student Loan Chit-Chat. Today is Wednesday, June 28th, 2023. Okay, so thank you so much for joining me. I want to respond to a question that somebody recently wrote to me on YouTube. And the person wrote, this is just part of the comment that they wrote, so I'm going to read part of that comment that relates to this video. I feel like people are buying houses, material goods, because they're not paying their student loans and not factoring their monthly payment. Can you talk or predict how the economy is going to go once the payment resumes in September? You know, that's a great question, and I am sure it is something that many of us have been thinking about, myself as well. I think in this particular case, and I'm only focusing on people with student loans, okay, so that's the crowd I'm focusing on, people who are going to be resuming their student loans when this economy, or not when the economy, but when the student loan payments start back up. I think there are going to be multiple responses when student loans start again. And I think the responses to how people are going to respond as far as when student loans start up, I think it's going to be kind of a tiered response. In other words, it's not going to be just a one size or one answer fits all. And the reason it's not statistically possible for it to be that way is because every single person, being their own individual, was in their own financial and personal situation before the economy. So no two people, so to speak, were in the exact same situation. However, how bad it's going to get for people, I think in some respects, we can predict part of that, okay? Now, I'm no economist, but having held student loans for 16 years, I kind of have an idea as to what it takes to keep paying on those student loans. So let's take a look at what I think is possibly going to be some of the various responses we're going to see to the startup. The first group of people I think of are the people before the pandemic who were in very stable jobs, possibly had multiple family income streams, so possibly two parents working or something like that. They weren't hurting before the pandemic. And guess what? That would be the same crowd that wouldn't be hurting after the pandemic. It's really, well, yes, the pandemic affected a lot of people. It didn't affect everybody in the same way, okay? We know that. And I really believe there is a crowd out there, even with student loans, it really didn't affect them at all, okay? Whether these student loans are private, whether they're public, they were able to make their student loans before the pandemic. Their income, their household income, so to speak, was high enough to get them through it. This is the group of people that, okay, maybe with the pandemic, they're drilling outside. Of course, just as soon as I start a YouTube video, of course. Okay, so I'm sorry about that. But this is the crowd of people that before the pandemic, they weren't hurting. They didn't hurt during the pandemic. In fact, they may have even continued making their payments during the pandemic because they were doing just fine. And now that we're on the other side of the pandemic, in just a matter of weeks, they're still in the same situation. So that crowd, they're not going to be affected. And I'm honest, I'm going to say that's not just going to be necessarily your high income earner crowd, but it does help, okay? So we have that crowd. They weren't bothered before, during, or after. Then I'm going to say we have the crowd like me. And I think there are going to be a lot of people in this situation. Matter of fact, I think most of the people are going to probably be in my situation or maybe even lower on the socioeconomic bracket. It's the people like me. I went into the pandemic with a public service job, okay? Modest pay, modest job, all right? I took every financial opportunity possible during the pandemic to improve my finances. That's going to be a big key, okay? And sometimes I think that's actually more important than how much you made before the job. The question is, before the pandemic, were you the type of person that took advantage of financial opportunities to save money, maybe lower your cost of living, and you were doing this prior to the pandemic? In my case, I was doing it prior to the pandemic. I purchased a very small condo in a modest neighborhood, okay? I didn't go for a house, a larger house. I didn't go for a fancy car. In other words, before the pandemic, I was financially in tune, I guess you might say, with myself. Okay? I was doing everything I could to live below my means. I think people in this situation, very much what I was in, I think so long as they continue to live within their means, so long as they're able to continue admitting that this is my budget, this is what I can afford, okay, I think those people will be able to start up their student loans without a whole lot of bumps. It is going to be difficult in the sense that, yeah, maybe, they were able to afford to eat out a little bit more. Maybe they were able to afford to travel a little bit more. That's going to have to be scaled back. But because that crowd, the crowd that I consider myself a part of, because that crowd, however, is able to hold and establish a budget, that crowd's already figured out their budget for the student loan restarting. It's not a shock to them. They're not in denial about it. And the other thing to remember also is, this particular crowd, this is the crowd that tried to save money, it's the crowd that was already taking steps to save money before the pandemic. I really think that one's spending habits, one's lifestyle habits before the pandemic is going to be a huge indicator. Because here's the bottom line. Somebody like me who was really working hard to save money, and I signed on my condo 3 weeks approximately before the city of Tampa completely closed down. But even before the city closed down, I was already on a track to live below my means. So when the pandemic hit, I did not raise my standard of living, and I did not waste the money that we got through stimulus or that we got because there was no student loan payment. All I did with that money was turn around and give it to the mortgage company to lower my mortgage. All I did during the pandemic was continue finding ways through the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, the PSLF, to get my student loan forgiven. I did not use the pandemic as an opportunity to go, hey, you know what? I think I'll go on really expensive vacations, buy a lot of high-tech toys and gadgets, okay, and waste my money. So long as that particular group, my group, can maintain a steady job, continue living below their means, continue working on their budget, okay, I think they'll be fine. It's going to be kind of maybe a little depression they might go through, because it is kind of hard. You've had that extra 200, 400, some people, it's over 5, 6, 7, 800 a month. It's going to be hard. Might be a little depression there, okay? But because this crowd was already able to admit what their bill was and was already working towards it, and keeping their lifestyle low, I think they'll be fine. There will be some rough patches getting adjusted to it, but I think they'll be fine. Now then, you got the crowd that I think that is going to have it the hardest. This is the crowd, and here's the thing, before I get into it, it's not always based on how much money you make, because it is easy to say, well, if you were wealthy before the pandemic and you were making 6 figures, you're going to be just fine. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. I think the biggest factor is going to be how good were you with your money before the pandemic. Well, let's take the crowd that is your, YOLO, you only live once, your FOMO crowd, your fear of missing out crowd. Okay, these are the people that perhaps are going to spend it as fast as they get it. As a matter of fact, it may even be spent before they get it. These are the people that before the pandemic, they were already living above their means. This is the crowd before the pandemic that may even have been behind on their student loans. Okay, now that's a really serious situation, because they've had 3 years off, student loans start up again, and if they fall back behind again, well, they're right back in default. And that's going to happen. There are going to be people who are right back in default within months of the student loan starting again, because they don't have the funds to make the monthly payments, okay? But let's put that aside for a minute, and then let's just look at their spending habits before the pandemic. If before the pandemic, they were already living above their means, they were in denial about the actual budget they have, they refused to bring down their standard of living, then this is the same crowd, likely, That during the pandemic, did they use their student loan money to lower their standard of living? No. And I think your post is correct when you say, you know, they bought stuff that they could afford only because student loans were, you know, what is it? Student loans were temporarily deferred. Yeah, you're absolutely right. This is going to be the crowd that said, hey, you know what? I have an extra $400 a month and you only live once, so let's go spend it. This is the crowd that may have bought too much house and might find themselves house poor. The crowd that could have taken advantage and made payments on their student loan interest free, but chose, no, as long as they're not asking for it, we're not going to pay it. Now, with that said, and I got my $110,000 student loan forgiven August 2022. But in all honesty, even if I had not had that forgiven, I would have continued making my student loan payments because I did not like the idea of pausing public service loan forgiveness for 3 years, okay? This is assuming they had not allowed us to have that 3 years as credit. So for PSLF people, you know, we need the 10 years. Really, that crowd now only needs 7 because we've just had 3 excused. But had they, let's just say they had said, well, you know, we'll give you the 3 years off, but none of those months are going to count as part of your 10 years. You still need to do 10 years. I would have continued making payments because the idea of dragging out, you know, student loans for another 3 years, forget it. But the crowd that is your, you know, we're living for today crowd, that would be the type of crowd, most likely, okay, that even if they're making enough money to pay on their student loan, they're not going to pay on their student loan. They're going to go out and they're going to have a good time. They're going to buy vehicles they can't afford, houses they can't afford, and when the payments start up again, all of a sudden that $400 a month to the mortgage, because the mortgage is, I don't know, let's just throw out a number, $1,900. They realize they can't really afford a $1,900 mortgage. They should have had it, you know, $1,300, $1,400. There is no single one response. But I think the single, if I had to pick one, it's going to be how were, let me say this correctly. How did people treat money before the pandemic occurred? Because how you viewed money, how you spent your money, what your emotional attachment is to money, those things were all gonna factor in the minute they said, hey, here's a $1,500 check once, here's a $1,500 check twice. I think we got like 3-4 stimulus payments, plus we got student loans off, right? We got 3 years off of that. In my case, I took the pandemic and I knew it wasn't gonna last for forever. And every time we got a stimulus check, I was blown away because I didn't think we would get another one. And every time they continued extending the payment of student loans, every time they continued the forbearance on that, I kept thinking, they're not going to do this one more time. But every time they did, I took it as an opportunity to improve myself financially. The people who were already trying to improve themselves financially before the pandemic, I can pretty much assure you, use the pandemic as a positive opportunity to continue improving those finances. They would be the people who continued paying on their student loan because they knew it was going to be 0% interest. It is the crowd that even if they needed a car, they bought less car than what they could afford. They bought less property than what they could afford. They did not all of a sudden go wild and, you know, go on vacations and spend their money carelessly. That crowd should be, in all, you know, hopes, that crowd should be fine. It's going to be the people that blew their money, that never took the opportunity to make their life financially better. Instead, they actually increased their spending, but not in a way that was going to help them down the road. In my case, during the 3-year pandemic, I used it to apply to get my student loan forgiven. I took that money, I put everything towards the mortgage. When we got the stimulus money, I put that towards the mortgage too. I can tell you the biggest thing I think I splurged on during the pandemic was a 65-inch TV. Okay, so don't write me any hate mail for that. But during the pandemic, I also picked up a part-time job, and that part-time job helped pay for the 65-inch TV. All right. I think that was the biggest technology thing that I purchased, okay? Otherwise, really everything I did went towards improving my living. Here is the bottom line. We're going to have people who are going to go into default on day one. I may even do a video about it because there are stories already coming out with people saying, hey, you know what? I'm not going to pay it all on my student loan. I don't care if it starts up. That's not a good roadmap for financial success. And I may do a video later on it, but a lot of people may not realize that depending upon what state you live in, they can even take your professional license from you. They can take your driver's license, they can take your professional license, they can also garnish your wages, and they don't need to go to court first. You know how private creditors have to go to court first, give you notice that they want to garnish your wages? Federal government doesn't have to do that. Why? Because it's the federal government. What scares me the most are the people who are going to be right back into default by Christmas. And I guarantee it to you, people will be back into default by Christmas. But I'm also willing to bet that if I were to look at the history of how they spent their money, okay, during the last few years, did they take every financial opportunity to improve their situation? Or did they take that money and simply blow it? And if they blew the pandemic money, on frivolous stuff, I'm willing to bet they were already on that track before the pandemic. And so perhaps there will be no actual surprise there when they're behind again after the pandemic. I do think that as far as a society, I think we need to be careful about people getting depressed. I think there will be hidden depression that people will not talk about because these student loans have started again. And there are lots of people who are very responsible at paying on their student loans. And this thought of starting it up again is going to be probably more emotionally difficult for some people and perhaps even more difficult than they think. My camera battery died, so I had to hook it up. So anyways, I was going to say the last crowd that I think is going to have a very difficult time, perhaps harder than anybody, even including the people who are behind, believe it or not, on their student loan payments. It's the crowd that's never had to make a student loan payment, yet they've been out of school for 3 years. Imagine being out of school for 3 years, all right? Depending upon the job situation that they're in right now, that's going to be a real shocker. If they are in a job that cannot cover their current lifestyle with a student loan added on top of it, this crowd is going to have, that group of people, I think they're going to have a very, very rough time starting. Because let's just imagine you graduated at 21, you're now, rounding the corner of 24, okay? You're in a job, you've got your lifestyle going, your student loan's been deferred. You've never made a student loan payment yet. You've never made one. And instead of setting your life up, from the bottom up where you start with your student loan and you kind of build on top of that, they've already built that lifestyle. The student loans never started, and now all of a sudden it's coming in and they're going to possibly have to go, oh gee, I can't afford that Starbucks every day. I can't afford, to go out of town to my, favorite relaxation spot every weekend. I can't afford the movies every month, whatever, okay? The bottom line is, I think that crowd is going to have it absolutely rough if they have not been taught how student loans work, if they were not guided in how to set up their lifestyle to always leave room for that student loan. The smartest group, I'll tell you the smartest group is, that's the group that they've been shoveling away their student loan money into a savings account for 3 years. That group, genius, okay? Even if they didn't get PSLF, their loan forgiven, like I did during the pandemic, they have 3 years stashed away, okay? And that's whether the student loans are private, federal, okay, whether it's public service, okay, for-profit, non-profit, it makes no difference. The group that was genius is the group that said, okay, we've had 3 years off, but during these 3 years, I'm just going to keep shoving money away. Because technically, that group has 3 years of student loans saved up, and they've just given themselves a whole big buffer room. Or, or another thing they may be able to do is take that if let's say, you put away, let's just say $5,000 a year, you'd have 15,000. Okay, and we don't know if the 10,000, 20,000 is going to come through. Well, that smart group, they've already got it sitting inside a savings account. If it doesn't come through, they've got 3 years saved up, and for many of them, they can just pay off the student loan possibly. For another big group, it'll be a big chunk off of their student loan. Okay, and for the group that has a really large student loan and the 10,000, 20,000 forgiveness won't do anything for them, but they've got 3 years buffered inside of a savings account, well, that could be considered 3 years of emergency student loan savings, 3 years that they can pay on their student loan. Well, they're trying to increase their income. That group was genius, absolutely genius. I'd like to think I would have been part of that group, all right? So anyways, that's pretty much where I think the economy is going to be going. It depends upon your view of money, what type of job you were doing as far as income, as far as, are you a go-getter in trying to improve your financial situation, or are you sort of the party person, we're only going to live once, it's okay if we blow it all. And I really don't think it's going to be strictly just about how much money you make, okay? You can make, 200,000 and be in worse shape than a school teacher. All right, it's not going to be strictly determined by, well, the high income earners are going to do great and the low income earners are going to do worse. Not necessarily. You can be a high income earner and live well above your means. You can be a low income earner and live below your means. So I don't think it's going to be as simple as just simply you make a lot of money or you don't make a lot of money. It's going to be more about your attitudes towards money, your attitude towards opportunity, how aggressive you were in improving your life before the pandemic. Because the pandemic was, to me, it was just simply an opportunity for people to show more of what they really are when they're around money. Kind of like when you win the lottery. I've heard people say the lottery isn't what changes you. All the lottery does is simply highlight more of the type of person you are. I think ultimately that's kind of what the pandemic did. And we're going to see in a few months, people's spending habits. And what is it that they say? The emperor's wearing no clothes. We're going to find out who is wearing no clothes. Thank goodness I have a full closet of clothing. I shall come fully dressed. All right, I'm Carrie. This is Student Loan Chit-Chat. Thank you so much for joining me. I do hope you will consider subscribing and have a great afternoon.